and welcome to the September Recreational Astronomy Night meeting of the Toronto Centre RASC. My name is Paul Markov. I'll be your host for this evening. We are live at the Ontario Science Centre, and we have a little over 20 people here. And to our online viewers, a reminder that we have resumed in-person meetings at the Science Centre, and hopefully you can join us here next time. This evening, we in fact have coffee and donuts, so if you were here, you could enjoy these. Courtesy of our member Tessie, who brought us the coffee and donuts for tonight. So thank you very much, Tessie. But for those who definitely cannot be here because you're perhaps far away, rest assured that we will continue the live online broadcast thanks to our top-notch AV team that's comprised of Andrew and Betty Reed, Ward LeGros, Enya Cholucci, and Reza Mohammed. Now, of course, as you know, I'm always looking for presentations for future meetings. I'm happy to say that the October and November meetings are full. However, the December 6th meeting is wide open and later meetings as well. So contact me if you have something in mind. So we typically have 3 presentations. However, tonight, Ralph Chou and Tony Horvatin have a special presentation in memory of the late Jeff Brown. Then Andy Beaton will present the sky this month, as he often does. Ralph will be back up here to talk about his solar eclipse trip down under Australia. And we have author and science writer Dan Falk here with us tonight, and he'll talk about In the Footsteps of Edmond Halley. Tom Luton, our president, will close the meeting as usual with announcements. We're typically done around 9:30, but because of the extra presentation this evening, we may go a little over that. If you're watching us online and have questions for the presenters, please enter your questions in the YouTube chat box, and someone will ask the question on your behalf to the speaker. Here in the room, if you have a question, put your hands up and wait till I come to you with a microphone so that folks online can hear your question. Do we have anyone here for the first time? Quick show of hands, member or not, doesn't matter. Welcome. And if you're watching us online for the first time, please let us know through the chat box and let us know where you're from. So let's get the meeting started, and I'll call on Ralph Chou and Tony Horvatin.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good evening, everybody. As many of you are aware, Jeff Brown passed away in early August, and Tony and I felt it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about Jeff because of the pivotal role he played in the development of the EC Carr Astronomical Observatory back in 1998 through 2001, particularly. Jeff was born in Montreal in 1941. He moved to Toronto to study architecture, received his Bachelor's of Architecture from the University of Toronto, and then began working with Carruthers, Shaw and Partners Architects, now known as CS&P, in 1969, and he worked there for his entire career until he retired in 2010. He became a member of the Toronto Centre in 1997 and passed away on August 11th of this year. Jeff's involvement with the Carr Observatory, the CAO as we now know it, began shortly after we acquired the property. And in fact, this shot by Marianne Harrington shows the residence building as it existed back in 1999. Shortly after we took possession and started planning out what we were going to do with it. Jeff sketched this layout of the grounds at the time, and you can see that he was pretty thorough about this, showing various things in the diagram, such as the parking area that had been installed, as well as the garage, the big pond, and a few other features in the landscape. as it existed. And he sort of looked at a concept of how the property could be developed into a working observatory property. And this very fanciful drawing is actually still at the CAO. I found it in the great room in the lower level the other day. And it shows the extension of the driveway and a huge parking lot and a cluster of observatory buildings, more or less the line north-south from the garage, overlooking the pond. And this is something that Jeff put together and presented to the council with the idea that if we were going to hold on to this property, we may as well figure out how to make good use of it. And this was the start of what we thought of for development. In 1999, we had our first open house at the site. And here's Jeff talking about the plans as he envisioned them. And the grounds are already staked out with the footprint of the future big observatory building that we were thinking about at the time. And at this point, I'll call on Tony Horvatin to carry on with the story.
Okay, well, thank you, Ralph. So I was involved too as well at the time when the observatory was being considered. And I was very fascinated with Jeff's thought process in looking at what kind of an observatory we wanted to have. So this was one of the earliest, there were many different versions, but this was one of the earliest versions that was actually considered. We might actually build this. So this was a totally wooden construction. So it's a plan view, and the observing floor is at the lower, and at the top there's a corridor with 10 lockers. So those lockers would be something of about the size of a shower cabinet, something like that. And the purpose of the lockers would be for members to be able to store their equipment on site. So you wouldn't have to hump it into the car and drag everything home and up the elevator and what have you. So he was already thinking forward about how we could make the site more useful to the members and how it could be more accessible and more efficient for members. So this building you can see, I believe it's about 30 by 14 feet. But then something happened and we had to change our perspective. So what happened was, as you noticed in the slide, Cliff Carr decided that he needed a new telescope. He was going to buy a 16-inch DFM, and he no longer needed his 16-inch LX200 Meade, which was fork mounted. And that was a very nice scope at the time. He said, "You guys want it?" You know, sort of, sure. So clearly the building that we had envisioned would not be suitable for such an instrument. So Jeff shifted gears and he moved to this steel superstructure. And so we did away with the lockers in this structure and we added a computer warm room. So this is the plan view. And I should stress really that Jeff, being a partner at Caruthershaw and Partners, he had no bones about getting the junior draftspeople and other people, engineers in the firm, to prepare all these drawings and the mechanical engineers to approve the engineering of them and get it all certified. And he did all of that pro bono for the center. There was no cost whatsoever to us with all of the work that he had done. So we ended up with an observatory with an observing floor that could accommodate extra scopes and a computer warm room as well. So here's a photo of Jeff receiving the H.A. Winnerls Award, which is the President's Award, from Ralph Chou at the time, who was president at that time. And the President's Award is unofficially sort of the highest award in all of Austria that a Toronto Centre member could get, because that's for service to the centre. And it was normally the awards have to be vetted by committee and approved by council, but the Winnerls Award is the president's choice, and it's usually secret until it's presented. So it's quite an honor to be presented with the H.A. Winnerls. So Jeff wasn't just a white collar office worker. He got right down and dirty. This is Jeff in the gravel bed of the form area of the GBO slab. So we did hire contractors to do the excavation and put the piles in, and then they formed it and put a gravel bed. But we did want to save money because we didn't have a lot of money, and he had some contacts, but we had to do some things. So we actually ran all the conduit ourselves, a small work party, and put it all in place. And then the contractors came back and poured the slab over top. And here's Jeff with a few other members that are supervising the crew from Steelgate Security Products in Mississauga. And what they're doing here is they're assembling and erecting the observatory. They built this observatory skeleton in Mississauga in their shop, tacked it all together, and took it apart, floated it up here on a truck, and assembled it in a day. And it was all done, no charge. Now, Jeff had a relationship with Steelgate Security because they were a contractor that CS&P used. So the owner of CS&P said, "Yeah, that's fine. No charge for this. We'll just donate it to you." So it was quite an amazing structure that we had built. And here's Jeff pulling on the rope as he's rolling the roof back, testing to make sure that it's rolling free and clear over the pad. So you can see the site looks a little bit different then than it does now, if you've seen the CAO nowadays with all the modals in the background. And of course, Jeff was a dirty shirt. He got right in there with the construction of the infill. Once the skeleton was up, then he started with other volunteers as well, doing the plywood infilling, and we continued on our own. And that's Jeff walking the peak of the roof up there. We did have a contractor come and weld on the steel deck, but then we put the insulation and the exterior steel roofing, and we did the building wrap, and as much as we could do. I think the final analysis, I think Ralph would concur that we probably spent about $25,000 of our cash reserves. The rest of this maybe $250,000 building or so was all donated, scraped together. And I'll turn it over to Ralph then.
So in the course of all of this, Jeff had his hand in many things. And there was always the issue about how many windows could we put into the place. Shortly after we took over the property, we got broken into. Somebody came along one summer's night and smashed in the door to the garage. They didn't take very much. They made off with a lawnmower that the local OPP detachment found at the perpetrator's garage sale the following weekend. They weren't exactly the brightest lights on the tree, but it really did raise a lot of questions, like what kinds of vulnerabilities would we have in the observatory as opposed to the house? And one of the arguments that we had was, well, should we have a window into the computer warm room in the observatory? And I remember the argument went back and forth between Jeff and Tony. In the end, Tony prevailed. But actually, Jeff had the last word, because this cartoon of a window with the proverbial ghost looking out through the bottom pane, and you can see the words La Fenêtre there reflecting Jeff's Quebec background, is still there. It's underneath the cladding and the aluminum siding. So he got his window, but not quite the way that some people thought it would be. Here he is in the observatory as we installed the 16-inch, and you can see Cliff Carr there on the left, just fiddling with the fork mount, making sure that everything's ready to receive the optical tube assembly. Jeff spent a lot of time up there by himself. He has a daughter, Chloe, who spent a lot of time up there with him, but he often took off and spent time at the site to get away from the world. And in December of 2000, he recorded these shots of the site after the first winter storms. And there's that snowdrift, 9 feet high, almost 3 meters. And you can see the staircase that he cut with the shovel up and down so that he could get from the house into the observatory. it was really something how much work he put into that place. The tradition continues even today. The wind patterns being what they are, we're still getting those big drifts. And in the spring, we resumed our work, and by middle of July, we were ready to go. We had our open house that year on July 21st, and that was the first light for the 16-inch in the observatory. And there we can see the members on the observing floor inspecting the installation. And here we have Jeff demonstrating the boat winch that we use to open and close the roof of the observatory for the first few months of its operation. And that wire sang like you would not believe. I don't know how we managed to do that without having somebody's head taken off by a broken cable. It was a dangerous thing, and I don't know how we actually managed to get away without somebody getting chopped. And we have Guy Nason here tonight, and Guy, you may remember as president presenting Jeff with the Jesse Ketchum Award that year in recognition of his work on the observatory, because we couldn't give him the renewals 2 times in a row. But we did really give him a lot of recognition, which he richly deserved. And Tony, here you
go. All right. So now we get into the next phase of construction. So this continued on. Ralph mentioned the boat winch that we were using, and that was sort of, we knew it was kind of temporary, but that's all we had. You had one winch at the north to crank it open, and then you had to go to the other side, release the ratchet, and then go to the south and use the other winch to crank it closed. So that's actually how we ran it for a while. But then another member came on the scene, one Charles Darrow, and he was associated with a family company of Rod Ends Mechanical. And Rod Ends arranged with someone who was a specialist in power transmission to create this motor drive. So the motorized drive is what you see in the left frame, and that's just being hoisted up into the utility closet in the GBO. So there's an electric motor, speed reducer, and the shaft that's in that fellow's hand on the left, I think it's Dietmar, I'm not sure, that's going to stick up through the ceiling to the device that's in the right frame that's being hoisted up on the ladder, and that's a sprocket set that gets mounted on the roof of the utility room. So the device on the left will drive the sprockets, and what that'll do is it'll take a chain and drag a chain open and closed as a point-to-point, and that works splendidly and still works today. We don't have a picture of it, but I should also give a nod to David Sage, who created the electrical control panel. Dave being a technologist by trade, he created a panel that allows us to open and close safely with lockouts at either end, and also reverse the phasing for the motor. And he just did all of that and donated everything, just no charge. Also, Rod Ends donated all of that equipment as well. So we were very, very fortunate with people who were very giving to make this facility come to life. And this is a picture I always take every opportunity to show that I can. It was taken by John Ginder, and where he's sitting on his behind on the floor in the computer room under the window that looks from the computer room into the observatory. And it just reminds me sort of the HAL 9000 in a nod to 2001 Space Odyssey. This is what HAL might see if he was looking into our computer room, or sorry, into our observatory. And there's the 16-inch looking out to the southern Milky Way. So, but Jeff was busy in a lot of other things, not just the GBO as well. On the left, we see him installing plywood bulkheads as we continue to finish our basement. And then later we had because the basement was completely, pretty well unfinished when we got the place. So we had to continue doing that. And how many here can guess what the picture on the right is actually looking? Do you know where that is? It's not that easy today to see anymore. The photographer is actually standing in front of the entrance of the GBO looking due west, which is now a lot of forest, and the Slow Observatory is near there as well too. So a lot has changed in the time. That rock that you see there with the tree, that's now quite a large plantation people might recognize. So in 2007, we were very fortunate. Our volunteers are very hardworking and they dug deep. And we applied to the Ontario Trillium Foundation and got granting to upgrade the telescope system in the observatory and our public outreach system, but also monies to build an accessibility ramp for the house. And this finally gave us the opportunity to complete the second story entry, which until this time had been just, we used to call it the stairway to heaven, right? Because it was a double door, but didn't go anywhere, just outside. So this is what it looked like after the contractor put the superstructure together, and then our volunteers did all of the infill, all of the picketing, and all of the deck boards that went in as well. And here's Jeff as well on the table saw and doing some of the miter cuts of the composite decking that we had there as well. So here's a great shot. I'm very happy to find we have some group shots because it really does show the community that we helped foster at CAO. Just so much fun. And work parties are similar too. You know, people come together with a common purpose and you break bread together for your meals. And it's quite a community building event. And we're just so pleased we're able to do that. And of course people, I always like to say, hey, there's me. I was there, right? So very, very pleased to see the car continues to be successful. And we really owe a lot of that to Jeff Brown. And of course, he knew how to kick back as well and have a good time. And Ralph.
Thank you. So one of the things that we established as part of the work party routines was the group meals. And you know, at pretty much every work party since the beginning, we have a photograph of the entire crew around the kitchen table or tables during the meal or after the meal, showing who was there. And you can see that Jeff is quite prominently seated at the table in both of these shots. And you know, it's a great way of fostering community, and many of us have made lifelong friends as a result of these experiences. Jeff also was a participant in one of my Eclipse trips. This is the 2006 one to Libya and Italy. And you can see him and his partner Sharon midway down the row of tents there in the Libyan desert on the morning of the eclipse. Patrick McDonald is all by himself in that first table there, and we're just waiting for the eclipse to begin. And the following week, we were back in civilization, as it were, in Italy. And here's a shot of Sharon and Jeff, along with Jeff Garrity and his wife Louise, in Rome, after spending a whole day at St. Peter's, prowling through that museum. And again, shows that he had many, many interests. And in fact, his own record of that trip is full of architectural details and so on, from both the Roman ruins in Libya as well as what he was seeing in Italy. Well, what's the legacy of Jeff Brown now? Well, in 2010, we have this sketch prepared by Blake Nancaro of the My Own Dome lot or modal concept that Charles Darrow proposed. And this was the idea of having a rank of, or a couple of ranks of small pods out on the south lawn of the observatory precinct. We've already built models 1 through 5, but there is some allowance for 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 as well, although we haven't done anything like that quite yet. But if you recall the drawings that Jeff made 25 years ago, there's a sort of resemblance. So the pattern is there, and we've been faithful to it. Here's the Sue Laura Observatory that was financed by Laura Chou and Sue Wheelband, which has the 8-inch Ritchie-Chrétien telescope for imaging, which was one of the more recent additions to the CAO facilities. And of course, the Jeff Brown Observatory, the big observatory with the 16-inch telescope, is named in Jeff's honor to perpetuate his role in developing this property. So here's an aerial shot of the CAO as it is, and this is pretty much the entire 51-acre plot of land from just to the left of that line of trees, over to the line of trees up the hill beyond the pond. That's all of our property from the adjoining lot over to the Bruce Trail property that's on the right, and from the house, of course, and the road down towards the lower right end of the photograph. And it actually extends a little bit further. If you really want to know the extent of the property, it probably goes down to roughly where the floor is at that position. That's our property. So it's a big property, lots of potential, and we owe it all to Jeff Brown for the basic concept of the physical plant. So thank you, Jeff. Rest in peace, my friend, and thank you very much. We have Chris Vaughn online from the from the CAO right now, so I guess we're going to patch him in.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from one of my happy places, the Jeff Brown Observatory at the Carr Observatory here up near Thornbury, Ontario. I was up here for other reasons, but I had a glorious evening under the Milky Way and all its majesty last night, and I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes just giving you some perspectives on what I really appreciate about Jeff's legacy, this fantastic structure that he designed and built. You know, one of the neat things is, of course, it hosts the 16-inch telescope that our members can come and use, but there's so much ample space in here. You can host a large group, share the universe with the large group, tour the sky. You've got your open roof, but walls to protect you from the wind. I've got my my big obsession telescope that I rolled in here that I've often used, you know, within these sheltered, structured walls, just to look up and enjoy the glory of the Grey Highlands. So, you know, the fact that it's got a separate warm room and computer and internet connection, all of the great bells and whistles that are part of the observatory are just make it a terrific tool for, you know, just beginners or more serious observers like myself.
Great. Good. Well, thank you, Ralph and Tony, and thank you, Chris, if you're still there. And we'll take a short break to switch over to our next speaker. So we'll be back in a minute or so.
Hello, my name's Andy Beaton. I live and observe in downtown Toronto, and I'm here to talk to you about what's coming up in the sky this month. People who have been through my talks before are probably familiar with this list. The big picture, key dates, the moon, planets, something in the deep sky, a double star, a variable star, and whatever is coming up in the world of spaceflight. So I start off with the big picture. This is what the sky is going to look like tonight around 9, once it gets dark, assuming that it's not too cloudy. Our favorite summer constellations are starting to drift away into the sunset. We still have a view of the summer Milky Way. It'll be up for a few hours yet. So if you're doing your summer Messier list, that's still available for you. By the time we get around to our next meeting, if we get up early in the morning and look to the east, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see all our favorite winter constellations coming up. Gemini, Orion, Cancer, even Leo just before dawn. And we'll have a nice parade of planets as well. So we're at the time of year where nights are getting longer. Good news for photographers who want that nice long stretch of darkness. Tonight, astronomical twilight ends around 9:12 and starts again at 4:45 in the morning. This is all Eastern Daylight Time. And by the next meeting, twilight ends at 8:10 in the evening. It'll be dark after that, and start again at 5:25 in the morning. So a lot more observing time coming up. So important dates coming up. The autumn equinox is on September 23rd. The new moon is on September 15th. Moon will be at apogee, which is furthest, on September 12th, and then perigee on the 28th. And I always encourage people to take pictures of the moon on those two dates with the same equipment, and you can compare the size, the apparent size of the moon in the sky. Full moon is on September 29th. On September 16th, the moon will be occulting Mars. And Venus will be at its maximum brightness on September 19th, where it reaches a ridiculous negative 4.8 magnitude. So the moon, first quarter is coming up on the 22nd, full moon on the 29th. Last quarter is tonight, and the new moon will be on September 15th. Lunar X will be visible on September 21st, and for those who have not seen or heard of it, there are a pair of craters on the moon that when the sun is at just the right angle, the rims of the craters are illuminated, making an apparent X in the darkness on the moon. It's actually a pretty cool thing to see. I would recommend at least seeing it once. And the lunar straight wall on the evening of September 24th, that'll be at its most visible. If you're looking for it in any kind of atlas, it's called Rupes Recta officially, but everybody calls it the lunar straight wall. So we got planets. Everybody loves planets. Mid-month, Mercury will be showing up in the morning. Apparently, it's going to be the best morning appearance of the year. So if you're a morning person, this will be your best chance to see it. Also in the morning, Venus, extremely bright and visible throughout the month. If you're up and looking to the east, you can't mistake it. There's nothing else that looks like Venus. Mars is getting close to the sun, but on the 16th, it will be occulted by the moon. However, it's close enough to the sun that I advise people to use extreme caution in looking for it. And actually, now that I think about it, don't look for it. It's close to the sun. If you bump your telescope, you could damage your telescope, you could damage your eyes. So don't do it. When I am legally covered, if you look for it, it's not my fault. Saturn and Jupiter. Jupiter rises around 10, and it's absolutely outstanding. It's nice and big, it's bright, it's got interesting moons, it's got weather. I might have seen the great red spot a couple of weeks ago. I can't be sure, but I can convince myself that I did. Saturn comes up just after, actually Saturn comes up even before. It rises around dusk and it's up all night. It's an even better placed planet to observe, and it's got those spectacular rings. If you have a chance to get your telescope out, this is an outstanding time to be looking for everybody's favorite gas giants. Uranus and Neptune up in the same crowd. Uranus is in Aries and rises not long after Jupiter, also visible all night. Neptune, halfway between Jupiter and Saturn. I was looking at those a couple of weeks ago and trying to decide which one was bluer and which was greener, and I honestly couldn't tell. I invite everybody else to go and have a look, compare them, and pop into one of the forums and let us know what you think. This should be dwarf planetary highlights. I know they're not real planets. Pluto's in Capricornus, and it's heading for sunset. So if you're going to try and see it this year, move fast. It should be manageable for probably this month, but not much longer. Ceres is in Virgo and sets before twilight is done. I think we're probably not going to see much more of it. I don't know, maybe you'll be able to see it, but you're not going to be able to get a good view of it. I always like to throw in a bit of deep sky stuff, something to encourage people to go out and look for it. I've picked a M33, the Triangulum galaxy this month, a 6th magnitude galaxy, and you never guess where. It's in Triangulum. Detectable to the naked eye under dark skies. I can confirm that. I've seen it, and my vision's not great, so if I've seen it, you could too. Binoculars, it's easy. And it's not far away from our fellow member of the local group, the Andromeda Galaxy M31. It'd be an interesting experiment to go and compare the two, which one seems brighter, which one seems larger. M33 is intrinsically a much smaller galaxy, but an awful lot of the Andromeda Galaxy is faint and hard to see, so it's an experiment. And that's what it looks like. And it really looks like a spiral galaxy. With a big enough telescope, you are going to see those cool spiral arms. Now, I know a lot of the people here are more advanced observers and they've seen M33, so we can dig out some more challenging activities for them, try imaging it in the various bandwidths that filters allow nowadays. H-alpha, I think, is an interesting one. If we just pop back here for a second, look at those red splotches. Those are giant emission nebulas in M33, and they're just begging to be imaged. And with a good filter, you can probably do it in the city as well. It's close enough that with a reasonably large telescope, you should be able to find globular clusters. You can find NGC 604, which is a 12th magnitude nebula inside M33. It's that big bright one down to the bottom left. You should be able to manage it with, I don't know, an 8-inch or larger telescope. And of course, it's long overdue for a supernova. You know, we should be getting supernovae on a regular basis in nearby galaxies, and I haven't seen one in a long time. So if you want to join a supernova observing watch, they have them online. You can sign up, and they'll give you a list of galaxies to check out, and you can participate in research and science that way. So comets and meteors, we have the Orionids coming up, September 26th all the way to November 22nd. The peak is October 21st, where we get 23 meteors an hour. That's well out of the next month, but we're going to get some of them before the next meeting, so I threw that in there. We don't have any other major showers coming up soon. Minor showers, we have the September Epsilon Perseids and the Southern Taurids. Those ones we're looking between 2 and 5 meteors an hour. It won't be spectacular. And I've thrown in a couple of meteor dribbles. These are 1 or 2 meteors an hour. The September Lyncids, the Chi Cygnids, and the daytime Sextandids. I wouldn't even step out of the door to look for them. The odds of seeing one are extremely low. But if you are out observing and you do see a good-looking meteor, and you can trace its path back to one of those locations, then you'll be able to put down one of these very minor meteor showers on your lifetime checklist. Comets, Nishimura C2023 P1, I guess, is the best comet we've got going right now. It is quite bright, 7.4 magnitude in Leo, but it is getting close to the sun. So I think we're going to have a few days where we have a decent chance of seeing it if it's clear. After that, it's going to be gone until it gets around to the other side. And I think when it gets around to the other side, it's going to be showing up in the southern hemisphere rather than up here. We have a few others, T4 Lemon, V2 ZTF, and K5 Pan-STARRS. None of them are particularly spectacular, but if you like hunting comets, there's some targets for you. If you've never seen a comet, it's worth tracking down and track them over the course of a few nights so you can see them moving around. I don't think any of those small ones are going to be big enough to have a tail or anything interesting like that, but you know, comets are interesting, and you never know when one's going to go into outburst. So I'm going to throw in aurora in the comets and meteors section. A few days back, we had some geomagnetic activity on the surface of the sun, which means we may be due for some auroral activity over the next few nights. No promises. I would go to spaceweather.com. They provide maps where aurora are expected and up-to-date forecasts, what you can expect on any given night. It wouldn't be my presentation if I didn't bring you a variable star. The one I've picked this month is Z Andromedae. It's an interesting one because it's one of those fascinating doubles, a red giant and a white dwarf, this time surrounded by nebulosity. The red giant is an 11th magnitude. It's slight Mira-type variability. You know, it's an old red giant that's on its way out. It's pulsing as it ages and goes through all kinds of weird helium and carbon burning stuff in its core. But this one's interesting. Every 10 to 20 years, we get a 3 magnitude outburst, and this is probably as solar wind blowing off the red giant accumulates around the red dwarf. It might be exploding in the accretion disk. It might be exploding on the surface of the red dwarf. It's a mystery. So this is one where observations are useful, especially if you're there when the outburst comes. And nobody really knows when the outburst is going to come, so it's up to us to get out there and observe it as much as possible. When we catch the outburst, we get online, we report it, and the scientists who care about this particular star are going to be grateful to you for finding it and alerting them. AAVSO.org, the American Association of Variable Star Observers, is the place to go for details, for maps, for charts with comparison stars so you can tell when it's brighter or when it's not. I advise everybody to do that. It's a fun bit of science that is not that difficult to do. Throwing in an extra variable star, because this one's still relevant, supernova 2023 IXF, or as we know it better, the supernova in M101. It's fading. It's down to 14.5 magnitude, and it's declining. But if you've got a larger telescope, I'm thinking 16 inches or larger, you can still make observations. If you have a photometer, you can make observations. Once again, the AFVSO is the place to go for all the necessary details. So there's always stuff coming up in spaceflight. I don't know if we have any disclaimer about personal opinions on things, so I will just observe that SpaceX is testing Starship potentially on Friday and say nothing more. PLD Space from Spain is aiming for a first launch of a suborbital rocket. This is Spain's first step into the business of space. Their previous launch was scrubbed because there was a danger of brush fires. Soyuz MS-24 is going to the ISS on September 15th. If you've ever seen the spaceship catching up to the ISS, it's quite spectacular. Chandrayaan-3 has not been designed to survive the lunar night. It may or may not come back once daylight returns to its location. So let's watch and see what happens. I personally hope it does come back. I think it's a pretty cool lander and rover. The ISS will be passing overhead in the mornings until September 10th. Evening passes from September 12th until our next meeting. Heavensabove.com will give precise times and locations. I don't even want to guess because I could find the time for right here, and 20 miles away from here, it would be totally out to lunch. So I'll leave that for you guys to do on your own. And the JWST. Keep an eye out for results coming from that. This is a spectacular picture of supernova 1987A. This is all in infrared, and the structure in there is just insane. I've never seen anything like that. So this is something that we're going to have to be watching for our spaceflight highlights for the next few years. And if you think that's spectacular, we've got this one of the center of M51, also in infrared. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. I'm going to make that the wallpaper on my phone. That's so cool. So what if it's cloudy or lower decks is on? Because I know I really want to see the next season. Zooniverse.org has all kinds of citizen science projects where you can sit at your computer and do all the data analysis that requires human brains, and the scientists need lots of people to get out there and do the work for them. JWST data is now in Galaxy Zoo, where you get an image of a galaxy and are asked to classify it. We have the Catalina Sky Survey, asteroid hunting, Meerkat, analyzing radio bursts from space, and kilonova seekers. Kilonovas are pretty wild. They're the explosion that comes when you get a collision between either neutron stars, black holes, or a combination of the two. So that's something that everybody should keep an eye on. Now, I know everybody is wondering, Andy, you always talk about the double star that you put out there for Blake Nancaro. For those who hadn't heard, Blake Nancaro recently passed away. And I wanted to do something to remember my friend and my double star mentor. So on his behalf, I've picked the best double star in the sky, Delta Cygni, better known as Albireo, 2.9 and 6.3 magnitude pair in Cygnus. They're bright and easy to split. They're well separated and absolutely beautiful colors. One is clearly gold, one is clearly blue. The contrast is spectacular. I think it's the most beautiful double in the sky. And I've picked this because it's easy to find and it's spectacular, and I would like everybody who gets a chance to go out and have a look for it. It's the head of the constellation Cygnus, or the foot of the Northern Cross, however you like to slice it. So go and have a look at it, and think of our friend Blake. Are there questions, corrections? You can contact me at andybeaton@gmail.com or contact me on any of those social media places. And thanks very much, and let's have clear skies.
Thank you very much, Andy. Great presentation as always.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions here in the room for Blake? No questions? Online? We have an online question? You have a question? Oh,
No.
they tell me somebody online had a question. Okay, here we go.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Andy. This might seem like a unrelated question, but I was noticing like Hurricane Idalia, and it was a spiral hurricane with an eye in the center. And it strikes me as being similar to the spiral galaxies with an eye or a black hole in the center. And I was wondering if the configurations of the hurricanes and the spiral galaxies might have an explanation in the law of physics.
I think the answer is yes, and I think the answer comes down to fractal mathematics. Nature likes to repeat patterns, and those patterns often come down to mathematical formulas. I don't know the exact mechanism of spiral galaxies or hurricanes, but it's clearly related. Yeah, there's got to be some kind of physical phenomena that's causing them to organize themselves in that way.
Okay. Let's go online. Emma, do we have any questions?
No, we didn't get any questions from online.
I have a question myself. You mentioned daytime meteors?
Yes. Daytime meteors are observable, and this is a cool trick you can do, is dig out your radio, tune it to a radio station that you don't get, something, I don't know, say in Montreal or Pittsburgh or something, and wait for the meteor to pass overhead. The ionization trail it leaves in the upper atmosphere will reflect those radio signals, and you'll get a few seconds of music or talk from that far distant station. AM or FM? I've always done it with AM, but I've also heard it done with shortwave, so it may be bandwidth independent.
Question here.
I was just going to make another, more of a comment than a question, but one thing you can do is look up Meteors Live on the internet. I believe it uses a transmitter that's located near Timmins, Wyerton, or someplace like that. And there is a receiver that's beyond the horizon for it, down in Virginia somewhere. But when a meteor ionizes a path in the upper atmosphere, it can pick up that signal from Northern Ontario, and it makes a really neat sound that you can listen to, in this case on YouTube, if you look up Meteors Live.
Okay, Meteors Live, that's exactly the words we want to search for?
I think the website is meteorslive.com, but it's essentially something that points to the YouTube channel.
I will check that out, thank you.
Also, we have the total eclipse coming up in 214 days, so everyone make plans.
That was out of the scope of my talk for tonight, but yes, we should keep that in mind.
All right, any more questions? We're good? All right. Thanks again, Andy. All right, we'll go to facts for a moment. We switch over to our...
Okay, good evening, everybody. This is just a brief report on my trip to Australia for the April total eclipse. This particular eclipse, the Ningaloo eclipse, as referred to by the Australians, was my 28th solar eclipse since I began seeing solar eclipses in 1963. And it actually was just before the 50th anniversary of my first eclipse cruise on the SS Canberra back in 1973. It's also my 19th total solar eclipse. So lots of different things to commemorate out of this particular event. And the interesting thing about this one was it is a hybrid. The umbral shadow didn't quite reach the Earth at dawn on April the 20th, but as it proceeded along the track, it finally did touch down somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, and by the time it reached its first landfall on the Exmouth Peninsula of Australia, that's when it was possible to see a total eclipse for sure. So this one was advertised widely, and when we take a look at the Exmouth Peninsula there, you have the little community of Exmouth at the tip of the Northwest Cape, about 1,800 kilometers as the bird flies from Perth, Australia, which is the only major city on the west coast of Australia. And there's a single road that goes up there. So you have a couple of choices to get to Exmouth. You either fly up, and that's not easy to arrange. You can try driving on the single road, which requires a four-wheel drive, and there aren't that many petrol stations along the way, so you have to be careful about running out of fuel, among other things. Or you can do what I did and take a boat. And so that was my solution to getting there. The trip itself was interesting in that, I hadn't flown since December of 2019. So this is my first foray into the airlines for this particular trip. Air Canada changed arrangements for me 6 times between the time I booked and the time I left. The last one was really great because they routed me through Toronto, Vancouver, Vancouver, Hong Kong, Perth. Okay, that's fine until you take a look at the details. You arrive in Hong Kong at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Your flight connection to Perth leaves Hong Kong at 2:59. Ooh, that's interesting. So that's the kind of thing you cannot fix online. You actually have to talk to a real person. So after about half an hour waiting, I get this very cheerful clerk on Air Canada's on their call center. And I explain the situation. She says, "Oh, that shouldn't be a problem. Oh my goodness." And the long and short was, we had to change my flight arrangements yet again. Toronto, Vancouver, Vancouver to Brisbane, Brisbane to Perth. Okay, finally. No more changes, please. And I was on my way. Get to the airport. I didn't even get through the screening at the beginning of the security line. They hauled me off and said, "We'd just like to take a look at your stuff." And they hauled out my computer and did a swab. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, sir. I get to the security sweep, and they decided that with all of my things, my telescope, the computer, the cell phone, the camera, you name it, SSSS. So that's the detailed security screening. They took everything apart in my backpack and my telescope case. And 40 minutes later, I went into the gate area. Wonderful start. Anyway, I got through to Brisbane, an hour going through that to get through customs and immigration. What do you have to declare? A couple of cans of maple syrup for the people I'm visiting. Oh, okay. Well, I'll be kind to you. Just go ahead. I won't send you through the secondary screening. Thank you. Then off to the domestic terminal, and I'm on my way on a 5-hour flight to Perth. Whew. So I guess it was something like 31 hours from the moment I left my house to the time I got to the hotel. Nice trip. Anyway, there we are. So we're on the way, and I arrived there, and you know, all of this wonderful stuff going on to get me to West Perth. And here's my hotel and a view of the downtown. The nice thing about Perth, though, is it's really set up for tourists, among other people. They have a series of buses that are all free. You don't have to pay a fare at all, and you can ride it all over the place. So I took advantage of that to do some touring of the area by myself during the time I was there. And I arrived on the 13th. I met up with a colleague on the 14th. We had a very pleasant lunch and then went out to the Perth Observatory. I spoke about that last meeting. And then the rest of the time until I boarded the ship, I spent wandering around the waterfront and looking at things like the lookout tower at the waterfront, and just taking a look around downtown Perth and all the things that are going on in that city, which is all by itself on the west coast. Lots of interesting sculptures like this kangaroo family that's out on the sidewalk in front of the old legislature building. And here we have one of the seabirds mimicking sculptures at the waterfront, eyeing me very suspiciously for some reason or other as I took his shot. Anyway, on the 17th, made our way from Perth out to the port of Fremantle to board the P&O ship Pacific Explorer, an 80,000-ton vessel that was formerly the Dawn Princess. P&O is a subsidiary of Princess Lines. They changed the ship's name and dropped it into the P&O fleet. It used to be the Dawn Princess. The Dawn Princess enjoys a less than healthy reputation among eclipse chasers because of a very unfortunate thing that happened in 2012. Some of you will recall that in 2012 we had a solar eclipse in Australia over Queensland, and we had an expedition that got clouded out there. If we'd gone to one beach north or one beach south, we'd have been fine, but where we were, oh well, there we are. But what happened with Dawn Princess is that the captain of the ship declined to take the ship into the eclipse path. He didn't into the path of totality. And I was looking at my records of the solar eclipse mailing list with all the vituperative messages about the quality of service on the Princess line as a result of that rather unfortunate cruise. So when I found that out, I sort of was thinking, is history going to repeat itself? I certainly hope not. But anyway, in for a penny, in for a pound, and off we went. So we boarded this ship and sailed out into the southern Indian Ocean up to Exmouth. As with any cruise, there's lots of things to do, but when you have about 2,500 amateur and professional astronomers aboard, astronomy talks are offered every day, and some of them got very, very crowded. As you can see here, this is one of the audiences for one of the astronomy talks. There wasn't a spare seat in the house. And among the speakers, they had professional astronomers, but they had this young man, Lachlan, oh, I've forgotten his last name now, but he's 18 years old. He's mastered astroimaging, and he was giving talks on how he was doing his astroimaging on this ship. And he did about 4 talks during the course of the cruise, talking about his experiences. It was really quite interesting listening to him go through his experiences. And then, of course, Kelly Beatty from Sky and Telescope gave a very well-attended talk about the eclipse itself And it ended up with this very nice little cartoon here of the three blind mice in the early days, just watching out for the solar eclipse that they were observing. Well, one of the things that you have to wonder about on a ship is, you know, this is going to be your platform to observe an eclipse. Well, where are you going to look for an observing spot? And, you know, there's a lot of real estate, but, you know, it's got to accommodate over 2,000 people. So I spent a day wandering the decks and looking at various things. So here's a shot from a staircase that is at the towards the bow, just over top of the bridge itself, and looking back towards the stacks, and you can see the pools. It's a two-level area here on the upper works of the ship, and the fantail in behind the stacks is a covered area, so that's not on at all for observing. And I was thinking, should I go up along here? And then I went forward, and in the right-hand shot, you can see the mast, which is on top of the bridge of the ship, carpeted area with a bit of a windbreak, and then there's another deck down below that, forward of the bridge itself. And I thought, this would probably be a good place to be for the eclipse, because it's wide open. The only obstruction you've got is that mast. And that shouldn't be a problem with the sun being at 70 degrees elevation. So that's where I decided to observe from. And it was a lucky thing I did, because on eclipse day, you know, after breakfast I go topside, and people have been up there practically all night staking out their turf. Here's my pathway up to the spot that I had chosen for my setup. And I finally got up there, and here's my setup, the tripod with the little telescope right next to the mast, and I'm looking towards the sun. They oriented the ship with the bow pointing towards the sun in the northern sky, so I'm glad I didn't look at a spot on the pool deck right in behind this superstructure where some people got stuck. So anyway, there I am, ready to go with my equipment, and just to prove I was there, shot with the Ioptron cube and the telescope. And I'd like to point out the little counterweight that you can see there on the front end of the telescope tube, something fashioned for me by Dave Sage to counterbalance the camera on the other end of the telescope. Worked like a charm. Now all I have to do is figure out a counterweight for the system so that the drive will actually work properly in the southern hemisphere, because I found that the way it was, it just had difficulty moving all that weight. And that's continues to be a bit of a problem for me. But anyway, we'll solve that in time for the next time. Lots of old friends on the ship that I didn't even know were going to be there, and I was bumping into them all the time. Here's a family of three, the Halpers, from the US. I've traveled with them to previous eclipses, and they have this tradition of making up a special set of viewers with filters and all sorts of interesting graphics. And they were parading around before and during the partial phases, showing their handiwork off to everybody. So they came along, and I couldn't resist taking a photograph of them with their viewers. Great old tradition. Okay, we're edging towards totality, and in fact, it was a good thing that I was there, because I was able to take advantage of the rigging and other paraphernalia on the mast to get these shots of the crescent sun on the carpeting. And again, this is one of the things that we talk about, you know, looking around to see what is going on during the partial phases. And here we see that lovely arrangement of pinhole camera effects from the small apertures on the mast itself. So that was pretty neat. And you can see also in the left shot, we're deep into the eclipse and we're already starting to see a little bit of that sort of sunset effect on the horizon that is typical of what we see during totality itself. Totality came and went very quickly. I was using Nikon Snap Bridge to control the camera, which was a big mistake because it turns out that when you are downloading the images from the camera into Snap Bridge, it doesn't allow you to do anything else. So I got these 2 shots of totality, but I couldn't get the diamond rings. You know, by the time it finished downloading, the second diamond ring was already underway and I couldn't get the shot. The one thing that was really quite remarkable, it's hard to tell from these images, but there is a humongous prominence at 8 o'clock on the limb of the sun. You can sort of see it in the image on the left. And it was spectacular. There are images online that show that in all its glory. It was a beautiful eclipse. But in any case, it came and went, and I got my 1 minute of totality out of it, which was great. So here's our, or almost a minute. I actually logged 59 seconds. The target position was 22 south, 114 east, and this is the measurement off of my GPS equipment. They were pretty close. And here are the contact timings that I recorded off of the camera and from my just taking it off the watch as I went. The watch is radio synchronized, so I know it was accurate. And we got 59 seconds of totality. So there we go. I think I'm up to about 1 hour and maybe 20 minutes of shadow time in the umbra. So I took along the eclipse flag of the Toronto Centre and laid it out after everybody had gone to lunch and got this celebratory shot. And then that evening, there was a dinner in one of the restaurants for the RASC contingent on board the ship. And about 5 of these people I've traveled with in previous eclipses as well. So it was a great reunion. This is the only time I ever saw them because the ship was so big, you just couldn't find anybody. So it was great to have a reunion and talk a little bit. And we had a wonderful time, a lovely dinner, until about 3 in the morning when Montezuma's revenge hit me. But again, happens with any ship. You have to be, no matter how careful you are, sometimes these things happen. Next morning, we arrived back in Perth. We have the little band there to play us off the ship and send us on our way. So back to the hotel in Perth, and then the next day onto the Indian Pacific train, which is sort of their equivalent of the Rocky Mountaineer. This is a luxury train trip that takes you from Perth to Sydney. Gourmet meals and little tourist stops and all the wine and other things that you could ever want. It's all included in the fare. So it was a very nice time on a 3-day trip. And you get to go to visit the abandoned village of Kalgoorlie, which used to be one of the train maintenance stops where they would refuel and take on water and so on. And in the modern time, they don't need it anymore, so this is just a ghost town. They to show you what life used to be like in the outback of Western Australia. And then we move on to Adelaide, and we arrived in Adelaide on Australia Day. This is their equivalent of Memorial Day. It marks the Battle of Gallipoli, where Australia lost a lot of its soldiers in an unnecessary military expedition. Here's the color guard forming up, getting ready for the parade. We arrived just in time to see them set off on their parade. And on the train that morning, right at dawn, we were invited to participate in the Australia Day ceremony on board, which is also very, very moving. After the walking tour and the parade, we went into the Adelaide Oval, which is their big football stadium, a gigantic structure, and they served us breakfast there, which was really nice. And then on to our last stop, which was the Blue Mountains just west of Sydney, the spectacular area. They take you down into the valley to see what used to be done and see some of the ecology and so on. And here's the Three Sisters, which is sort of the trademark monument, natural monument of the Blue Mountains. And then it was back on the train and off to Sydney, where I spent the rest of the trip and then flew home. And that was the time when I got to argue with the government agency that produced all the misinformation about safe viewing practices. And, ARPANSA, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, did a wonderful job of misinforming people about solar eclipse visors and viewers. And I spent a very frustrating hour in a teleconference with them. Turned out they had never even looked at one, let alone handled one. And they wrote all this stuff up, totally uninformed. Talk about bad science and bad regulation. But there we are. Anyway, what's next? Well, eclipses number 29 and 30 are October of this year and April of next. And I've got my plans already set up, and hopefully they will be equally clear as I had the skies over Australia last April. So there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph, for sharing your adventure with us. Do we have questions for Ralph? All right, so we have Dan.
I have two questions. I hope that's okay, so that will save microphone passing. The first question is, so I've never seen an eclipse from a boat, only from dry land. So was I hope there wasn't too much rocking. So the first question is, was it stable enough in terms of, doing photography? And question number two, in 2012, what excuse did the captain have for not going into the path, which I assume is what everybody had paid for?
Yeah. Okay. As far as this eclipse was concerned, they parked us in the middle of the Exmouth Gulf. So the water was really, really calm. The swells were very minor. The stabilizers on the ship were able to keep us pretty steady throughout, even though we were not moving. They dropped anchor, sort of hove the ship into this position where she was facing north, and it was steady. It was not like when I was on Canberra, where you sort of went click, 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 and things like that. This time it was just straightforward. And the other nice thing was, because you could, you were using faster optics than what we had back in 1973, the shots were actually very, very fast. So the motion was defeated. It worked out really well. Now, what happened in 2012, there's a combination of things. Stormy weather, bad winds, and just a general reticence to be given instructions by a non-sailor. It was a whole litany of things that went on that just made the thing unravel. And it's just one of those things that happens. Remember, the captain of the ship is absolute ruler. What he says is law. So you can't go against him. And in this case, he decided that he was not going to do anything to risk the ship. And so the crews just, they went out and missed it. It was just unfortunate. People were not happy.
Okay. Any other? Any other questions here in the room? No? How about online? Emma?
We didn't get any questions online, but we did get a few comments saying that you had a great talk.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. All right. Thanks again, Carl. For a moment, we'll be right back with our next speaker. No fun facts? To our next speaker? Okay. Come on up, Dan. So Dan will talk to us about, was it in the footsteps? Edmond Halley, yeah, footsteps, not the footpath, footsteps.
All right. Yeah, it's great to be here. This is my first time in person in, well, I don't know, but before the pandemic at least. So it's delightful to see familiar and friendly faces. And of course, once they finish that LRT, I'll just be coming all the time because I actually live at Eglinton and Spadina. It'll be one trip, direct thing straight across. So I know I can use the arrow keys, but if I wanted to, in terms of a pointer, it's built into the mouse, is that correct? Or just like this, right? Is that it? Just use the cursor as a, yeah, okay, that's fine. That should work. I was thinking about Ralph's excellent talk about Australian eclipses, so I should just mention, and I know Ralph knows this, and people who know their history will know that there was an eclipse in 1922 that was visible from Australia, and Canadian scientists played an important role in going there and making measurements. So I have an article coming out that I've co-written with my friend and colleague Victoria Fisher, who looks after the scientific instruments collection at the University of Toronto, where they actually have a lens that was used by Augustus Champ to watch the solar eclipse and make measurements to test Einstein's theory. So that's going to be published online in University of Toronto magazine. So it'll be freely available, no paywall or anything, and that's coming out quite soon. So anyway, 101 years ago, Australia. I didn't go, unfortunately, to any of these Australian eclipses, but I wish I had. And I did the math, Ralph has been to just over 5 times as many total solar eclipses as me, but I've been to an okay number, but I'm impressed with Ralph's number. So I'm going to talk about Edmond Halley. Now you know the comet, of course, because everybody knows the comet. Depending on your age, but I think most people in the room are of approximately the age where this would apply, that you will remember what you were doing in the winter of 1985/1986 when the comet came around the last time. And I see some heads nodding with the bright lights. It's a little hard for me to specifically see who's nodding and who's not nodding, but many of you are nodding your head. And I distinctly remember I was, well, new-ish to astronomy, but I had, well, yeah, no, I already had a small telescope, and I certainly had my parents' binoculars and stuff, and I went out and saw Halley's Comet from Halifax in December, and it was quite disappointing, really. It was very, very faint. And then we went to Florida, as we often did in very early spring, so I guess it was around March, and the view was better. And it's funny, I had some of my I have my old 35 millimeter slides, and I was just looking at them the other day to see how bad the images were. And it's like, I mean, I've got a picture, it's a star field, and it's labeled in my handwriting from the time, Halley's Comet. It's like, where's the comet? I mean, I'm looking at this thing, holding it up to the light, and it's like, all right. But I did see it in late 85 and early 86. So I'm going to talk, I didn't commit all this to memory, so I'm going to occasionally, it's not my phone, right? Because my phone's over here and it's not making any noise, but something's alarming. So Halley, of course, did much more than find a comet. He sailed to St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean, which I'll talk about. He worked on figuring out the size and shape of the Earth, as well as the size of the solar system. He mapped the Earth's magnetic field. He studied tides and monsoons. He tried to solve the problem of measuring longitude at sea, to name just a few of his pursuits. So just this past spring, in May, I walked in Halley's footsteps. I will, okay, spoiler alert, I did not go to the South Atlantic. I did not go to the island of St. Helena, but I did go to London and to Oxford, which is 2/3 of the battle, I guess. And I do feel kind of privileged because some of you know I write articles for Astronomy Magazine and elsewhere. So for astronomy, I've profiled a number of dead astronomers, including Thomas Harriot and Tycho Brahe. And this time it's Edmond Halley, and it's really just so much fun to do. And I love writing about dead people because it's just, I mean, they're not going to say that they don't like what you wrote, you know? So it really is something I enjoy. Yeah, so there's the lay of the land, London and Oxford in the upper left there. Halley was born in 1656 in Haggerston. Where's Haggerston? It's a village, at that time it was a village just about a mile and a half northeast of the old city of London. But of course today it is simply engulfed by the urban sprawl of London. So, and also we don't know which house in particular it was. So there is, as far as I know, there's no plaque or anything to indicate a particular place. So I didn't go to look for it because I figured there's nothing there to actually see. But this village of Haggerston would be just a little, you know, north and east of where King's Cross railway station is today. So my starting point in terms of following in these footsteps would be the Royal Society, which you can see right, well, it's right there, left of, yeah, just there. Right in the center of Westminster, right in the, you know, couldn't be any closer to stuff. You're sort of in between Buckingham Palace and Trafalgar Square. Now, let me see, where am I? Oh, yes. The Royal Society, let's go to this picture here. On Carlton House Terrace, of course, it's moved around a number of times over the years. It dates actually from 1660, when it was granted a royal charter by King Charles II. Halley was elected a fellow of the society in 1678 and would later take on the role of secretary. So as a journalist, and this is again sort of one of the really fun parts of my job, is I email somebody there and say, look, I'm going to be in London. Some Googling told me that they have 2 of the 5 known portraits of Halley, and could I drop in? And they said, oh yeah, you can come and we'll show you the portraits. So one of them is on, oh, actually, neither of these are Halley. That's Stephen Hawking on the left and biochemist Jean Thomas on the right. I guess this is sort of a, you know, a tea room. It's just kind of a cool place to visit. I kind of wish I worked there, maybe had a fellowship to hang out there, but oh well, I was just there for one afternoon. So they take me up to the 2nd floor and show me the portrait of, I guess what I affectionately call old Halley, to distinguish from young Halley, which you'll see in a minute. And here he is looking, I guess I would just say a little grumpy, but you know, he's getting on in years by this point, and he's holding on a sheet of paper there some of his work on, well, it's a little hard to tell, but I guess something involving celestial bodies. But I say to the librarian fellow who's showing me around, you have a portrait of young Halley. Where's that? He says, oh, that's in storage. Well, why is it in storage? Well, they just have so many awesome things there, and it's a limited amount of wall space, so not everything can be out on display. But he says, don't worry, I'll go and fetch it for you. Just wait here. So I just wait here, and he brings it out, leans it against a cabinet or a wall, and there's young Halley. Now, of course, this picture is, like, it's not a secret that it exists, so if you do a Google image search, you will find it. So it's a little easier to see as per Google image than it is in real life. But there he is. So this is so in the previous one, sorry, in the previous one, of course, he's wearing a wig. But this is, as I understand it, his own actual hair. I don't know at what age it becomes mandatory to put on the wig, or I don't know how that works. But there he is. And let's see. Okay, now we don't know, unfortunately, we don't know too much about his personal life. We know that he took a keen interest in math and astronomy and enrolled in 1673 at the Queen's College in Oxford, where he would later return as civilian professor of geometry. As a student, oh, okay, so there's, yeah, the university, just some pictures from around town. Some of you, I'm sure, have been to Oxford. It is a wonderful place to visit, great place to be a tourist for a day. I love the fact that there's a little street called Logic Lane, and I know I've taken the same photo on different visits, but I think Toronto should have a Logic Lane somewhere. So yeah, he lived, or as a student, he probably lived on campus, so to speak, in the Queen's College, one of the older, they're older ones, but this one dates from 1341. Now, of course, these buildings that you're seeing in the picture do not date from the 14th century, they date from the 18th century, which is why they have that sort of much newer neoclassical look to them. So these buildings post-date Halley's time there. I don't exactly know what the college looked like in Halley's time, but it was probably very elegant, and I'm sure there was lovely green space and that sort of thing. So that's where he was as a youngster, and then he came back as a professor, at which point he was given this house that I think just, it comes with the title. When they elect you civilian professor of geometry, you get to live there, I think, as I understand it. So that's his house, and I've been to Oxford previously, but what's new this time from my last visit is that they've added that little plaque, which I'll now show you a close-up of. So that's new, the plaque that says his name, his dates, and of course a little picture of a comet. And then, sorry, just going back to the previous picture, supposedly, according to what I've read, he conducted observations from the roof, and that little thing that sticks up at the top in the middle, well, I mean, I don't know what's in there now, who knows, but it did at one point serve as his observatory. I mean, it must have looked a little bit different in Halley's time, but that's just kind of cool to think that he was up there, in the middle of the night, probably disturbing the people around him and stuff, and making noise and looking at the stars, and I'm sure Britain was much less light polluted then than it is today. So while still an undergraduate, he published a couple of papers on the solar system and on sunspots. He wrote to John Flamsteed, who was the first astronomer royal, to alert Flamsteed to mistakes that Halley had found in published tables on the position of Jupiter and Saturn, and also mistakes that he found in star positions published by Tycho Brahe. So even as a youngster, he was making a bit of a name for himself. As I say, we don't know too much about his personal life. He did marry a woman named Mary Tooke, or Tooke, Tooke, in 1682. We know that they had 2 daughters, and the marriage lasted 54 years until Mary's death. And he, and he spent some time on the high seas. He was a bit of an adventurer in that regard. So in 1676, not long after his 20th birthday, he sailed to the remote volcanic island of St. Helena. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. The southernmost piece of land under British rule. And he was determined to accurately chart the southern stars, which had not been done up to that point. What went wrong? I mean, he did eventually succeed, but the weather there was dismal, it turned out. He tried to observe both a solar and lunar eclipse in the spring of 1677, and he was clouded out on both occasions. He did have better luck with the transit of Mercury, which he observed also in the fall of 1677. But he persevered, and he did eventually. Okay, these are just some of his charts. The one on the left you already saw as part of my title slide. I like the one on the right, which is, I just love the amount of detail in it, because you're seeing Cornwall and Devon and the southern half of Wales and bits of Ireland, and I just like the look of it. Yes, and this is just lifted from Wikipedia, but these are, what is it, pronounce that anyway? Isogonic? I mean, one of you folks must know how to pronounce that. Anyone? Isogonic, okay. So isogonic lines of equal magnetic declination. And the gist of it here is that, a compass magnet points to the north magnetic pole, which is different from the north geographical pole, and you have to know what that difference is, or you'll get lost as you're sailing around the globe. So this is something that had to be charted. Oh, okay, and just another map, again, lifted from the internet, obviously, showing where he went. And Again, some Googling tells me that, of course, he stopped very close to St. John's, Newfoundland, and that the RASC in 1994 put up a little plaque to mark the spot. Now, does anyone know, like, can anyone just say that, yes, that's correct, and they did that? I mean, Ralph, you must know this, or, yeah.
I think that's correct. They had the RASC General Assembly about 10.
Okay.
The plaques. I think that's correct.
Okay, cool. Because I know they also put up a plaque to mark John Winthrop's visit there to view. That was a transit of Venus, right? If I'm remembering correctly. This is, of course, a different occasion, but also very plaque worthy. So at any rate, it's just, I mean, you just may not necessarily think that Edmond Halley had anything whatsoever to do with Canada, but there you go. He got off his boat, at least for a little while, near what's now St. John's, Newfoundland. Let me just see here. Oh yeah, the catalog of the Southern Star. Yeah, here it is. He persevered, eventually succeeded in charting the southern sky, returning to England the following spring, and his catalog would be called the, can't really say it in Latin very well, but Catalogus Stellarium Australium, basically just a catalog of the stars of the south. He did have further, he went on multiple voyages, so he had a few different adventures. At one point, again in the far south of the Atlantic, his crew spied 3 unusually flat, treeless, quote, islands that were, as he described it in his log, quote, covered with snow, milk white, with perpendicular cliffs all around them. These were not islands, these were icebergs that he had found. And in due course, fog descended and his ship almost became trapped in the ice, and that would not have been a good thing at all. But they were able to escape northward, eventually reaching the island of Tristan da Cunha, another very remote island in the South Atlantic, where Halley was able to, quote, recover the warm sun, who we had not seen for a fortnight. So I'm actually kind of glad I was not there. An intriguing episode, okay, here's some lovely stamps from St. Helena showing, sort of commemorating Halley and his doings down there. Now, there's a meeting, very famous, and so I know, some of you know this, I'm sure, but Halley and Newton met up and talked about, I did a Google image search, as one does, and I thought there would be a whole bunch of images of the two to choose from, but I really just found these 2, but that's all right. This gives you an idea, or a caricature at least, of what was going on. So what happened? So Halley and Newton, independently, had both been thinking about the motions of planets and moons and comets. So Halley, I want to say, hops on the train, but of course they didn't have trains at that point. So he took the carriage, pulled by horses, up to Cambridge from London to chat with Newton and asks him, so I know you've been thinking about this. Suppose you had a force that fell off with the square of the distance, as we would say today, a 1/r² force law. What would be the resulting motion of the object around the other object? And Newton says, oh yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I've thought about that. In fact, I did the calculation. In fact, I've got the calculations right here. Oh my goodness, where did I put those papers? Gosh darn it, I can't find them. But don't worry, I'm just going to redo the calculations, and I'll let you know. I'll send you a letter. I'll let you know what I find. So Newton gets to work again on this project, publishes a short little work called De Motu, and then a longer work that everybody knows because it's very famous, his Principia. And that finally comes out in 1686. So how much credit goes to Halley? Well, it's hard to say. But Halley, I mean, it's hard to separate the lore from the actual sequence of events, but Halley is seen as being like the instigator, the person who nudged Newton to actually get off his rear end and set this thing down. Because Newton was actually kind of a private individual, and I mean, kind of a little different from today, because today people publish, everybody wants to publish. Even people who have like really bad ideas want to publish them really quickly and get the word out. But Newton was kind of a recluse and had to be kind of nudged to actually do it. And of course now the Principia is one of the keystone books in the history of science. So a few words about the comet here depicted in 1066. Actually, on the same trip. I mean, it's just kind of a coincidence that this is the case, but my travels started in Paris, and I was with my brother for this part of the trip. We hopped on a train and did this little side trip to Bayeux, and I saw the tapestry in all its glory. It's in a nearly pitch dark room with very dim lights, so as not to damage it, et cetera, et cetera. But if you have a chance to visit Bayeux, it's just such a cool thing to see with your own eyes. Okay, so Halley and his comet. In the fall of 1682, Halley is carrying out a series of observations of this comet that would eventually come to bear his name, and he concluded that the object that he observed that November was the same object that had been seen in 1531 and 1607. So he does a bit of math. He concludes that the comet must be moving in an orbit with a period of roughly 75 years. Predicting that it would return in 1758, which it did right on schedule, though, of course, unfortunately, Halley did not live to see that. But the return of Halley's comet, and again, there's a danger of descending into sort of cliche and stuff, but I do like to think of it as a pivotal moment where science was just really coming into the fore, because comets had been objects that were feared, right? I mean, Shakespeare wrote about them. If you saw a comet, it meant probably that something terrible was going to happen, that you were about to lose a battle. Of course, that means it was a good omen for the other guys who were going to win the battle. But anyway, you see, they were thought to be these things that were mysterious and very significant. And after this point, it's like, okay, we've got an explanation rooted in physics and mathematics, and comets have been tamed, so to speak. So I just think that's, again, I'm not a historian, and historians don't like it when you point to such and such and say, now this is a turning point, because they'll tell you that, in fact, it was very gradual or whatever. But I like to think of it as kind of a key moment. So Halley was named Astronomer Royal in 1720. Oh, here's a little map of Greenwich. And it also shows Blackheath, which is the neighborhood just below Greenwich, where the tomb is, which I'll talk about shortly. Yeah, okay, there's the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. Oh, actually, now it was a little cloudy on the day that I was there. I mean, I've been there a number of times over the years, but cloudy in 2023. But this is, my friend Roger Highfield took this photo. I'm showing this to prove that the sun does sometimes come out in Greenwich. Okay. So let's see, yeah, so following the death of Flamsteed, the first Astronomer Royal, Halley is appointed to the position. He goes up the hill and he finds that, in fact, it had been stripped of all its instruments by Flamsteed's wife, Margaret, arguing that, well, Flamsteed had paid for the instruments himself, so they were his. And then, she could, whatever, sell them or do something with them, but they're not public property, they belong to the family. So Halley eventually persuaded the government to pay him an extra £500 to acquire new equipment. But there are other issues, which is that Flamsteed had mounted his mural arc, which is kind of a quadrant-like. Well, I'll just go to the next, oh, okay, well, the notes and the slides are not perfectly synced up, but that's life. Let's go here. Yeah, that's Halley's mural arc, and I'll go back to the other thing in a minute. So there was a device like this that had been built by Flamsteed, but it was mounted on a brick wall, and that brick wall was slowly sinking into the ground. So that's a problem, because it's also, amongst other things, it's sort of defining the 0 point of longitude. So Halley, with this government funding, builds his new 8-foot mural quadrant. You're seeing it there in the image, and he puts it on a sturdier slab, and it doesn't sink into the ground, so that's good. But if you visit this room, so this is called the transit room for obvious reasons, I guess, at Greenwich. But one thing that I noticed, and again, I've been there previously, but I guess I just wasn't paying enough attention on previous visits. But what I noticed this time is there are basically 3 prime meridians And why is that? Now, only one is the brass line that extends out onto the plaza where the tourists all have their photo taken. But in the actual transit room, you see 3 lines marked on the floor. So why is that? Well, it's because every time they elect a new, not every time, but just about every time a new astronomer royal comes in, they install a fancier transit device that, that looks at the, tracks objects as they pass through the local meridian, the highest point in the sky that they're going to get. And so you don't want to just take down the existing one, so you just build a new one. And the tradition that got established was you just build it 6 or 8 or 10 feet to the east. So you just say, all right, this is the new prime meridian. Here we go. My device, new prime meridian. And you're thinking, oh my God, how can you change the prime meridian? Well, you can change it anytime you like. So it's not like the equator, right? The equator is an actual, well, somewhat of an actual thing. Like you can't decide to put it somewhere else because it has to do with the Earth's, it's defined by the Earth's axis. But the prime meridian of longitude is a convention. It's wherever you decide, it's wherever you say, it's where the person with the most clout says it's going to be. So Flamsteed put it there, and then Halley puts it here, and then, let's see, I think Bradley comes along. Yeah, Bradley, who is Halley's successor, puts it a few feet to the east, and then finally Sir George Airy comes along and puts another one in, and that's the one where they said, yep, we're done. Like, this is going to be it. And the brass line where the tourists take their photos is lined up with with Airy's transit instrument. But one more piece of trivia along, and I didn't at all time this, so somebody can wave at me when I'm down to my last 5 minutes, but I'll hopefully not go over time. But there is actually yet another prime meridian because modern GPS systems use another imaginary line about 300 feet further east, and that's the International Reference Meridian, or IRM. And why it doesn't line up with Airy's, I don't know. So don't ask me that during the Q&A. But I'm sure there's a really good reason why it's 300 feet further east. Halley held the position until his death at the age of 85. And going back now to this one, so this is, and I'll go back even further a second because you're wondering, what is this? Well, this is Halley's original gravestone mounted up vertically on a wall, but you can also see it here. So it's actually just, I'm gonna struggle a bit with, oh, well, I've lost the cursor altogether. Well, it doesn't matter. It's in the upper photograph, 4/5 of the way to the right. You can see this little vertical slab of rock. It's not a door to the camera obscura. It's a slab of, it's a gravestone. It's the original gravestone of Edmond Halley, and with a little explanatory plaque. So what's going on? Well, Halley is buried at the Church of St. Margaret's, Lee. I might as well go forward to that. Yeah. And after however many, I don't know, a century or more, the gravestone was in such poor repair that they took the original gravestone and put it up at Greenwich, and then had a sort of replacement one put in here. But ironically, the replacement is far more weather-beaten than the original. So the original is actually just about legible, and this one, my friend and I stared at it for a good length of time, and you can make out certain words, but it's in quite poor shape. But visiting the grave was really a bit of a mini adventure in its own right, because St. Margaret's Lee, and again, you can sort of tell by looking at it, it's a newer church. The original church, I forget if it burned down or just fell apart or whatever, but the newer building dates only from the 19th century. But the church has sort of 2 cemetery areas, and this part is usually behind, there's a gate, and it's generally locked. It's not generally open to the public. So again, I did some Googling, sent an email, and literally, the church lady came to meet me that day and said, oh, you're a journalist from Canada, welcome, and unlocked the gate, and my friend and I went in, and it's just kind of cool to see, and it's kind of sad that it's in poor repair, but there is Halley's grave in all its glory. The text is partly in Latin and partly in English, but the critical part reads, beneath this gravestone, Edmond Halley, unquestionably the most eminent of the astronomers of his age, rests peacefully with his dearest wife. As he was a man so greatly cherished by his fellow citizens during his lifetime, so let a grateful posterity venerate his memory. And in all, there are 5 members of Halley's family buried there, along with John Pond, who was another astronomer royal, and in fact, nearby in the same cemetery is yet another astronomer royal, Nathaniel Bliss. So there's a lot of astronomers in this place. But it's interesting, and I don't know all the details here, but by the time that John Pound died, Halley had already been dead for about a century. So I don't know how he worked that, but somehow he must have told people, like, when I go, stick me in there. I want to be in the grave with Halley. And I mean, I just don't know how one goes about negotiating that sort of thing, but that's where he is. And because his inscription is the more recent of the inscriptions, it's actually the most legible. So it's a bit easier to read that Pond is in there than it is to make out that Halley is in there. And that's almost it. Oh yeah, so there's the ruins of the original church, which, as you can see, is a much older style of building from the little bit that's left of it. Oh, and actually, this is kind of neat. And you know, I was in there, as I say, my friend and I were in there for probably 90 minutes at least, because I'm, you know, taking photos from every conceivable angle. And then she said, you know, isn't it kind of weird that there's this, you know, there's these condominiums like perched right up at the edge of the cemetery? It's like, yeah, you're right. That is kind of, I mean, not that, you know, I mean, London's a crowded city and real estate is at a premium. And I don't know if they're apartments or condos, but it's obviously residential. And it's just kind of funny that you could, if you lived there, you could literally look down at Edmond Halley as you were having your morning coffee. And I hope the people who live there do, you know, appreciate that. Maybe they do. I have no idea. I didn't try to knock on the door because that would be weird, but I just think that's kind of interesting. So that's where his mortal remains are, but they're in Westminster Abbey, and I didn't go, but I've seen it on previous visits, but there is a plaque commemorating him not far from the grave of Newton, and of course Hawking is there, and Charles Darwin is there, and a bunch of folks. And let's see, I know the print, yeah, it's probably too hard to read the small print, and I have to go like this to read it myself, and maybe I'm too far away from the microphone, but I'll just speak up. So it says, first to predict the return of the comet named after him, second astronomer royal, fellow and secretary of the Royal Society, sponsor of Sir Isaac Newton's Principia, editor of Philosophical Transactions, civilian professor of geometry, Oxford, oceanographer, meteorologist, geophysicist, inventor, navigator, and famed for his researches in determining longitude. He laid the actuarial foundation of life insurance. And I didn't even talk about that last item because it's not as interesting, but that is a long list of accomplishments. So at any rate, he did a lot of stuff beyond just looking at that one comet. And just on a final note, the comet is this December, it's coming up on aphelion, which means it's going to be as far away from our part of the solar system as it gets. And at that point, it'll be some 25 astronomical units, or nearly 2.5 trillion miles away, way out beyond the orbit of Neptune. But it will be back. Thank you. Yeah, I guess if anybody has questions, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing the historical perspective with us. Very interesting. Any questions for Dan? Okay, we've got one over here.
Just in that picture of that memorial there, what's that gizmo right in the middle of the round disc? It looks like a satellite to me.
Yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that at all, because again, I didn't actually look at the plaque on this visit. I would have seen it some years ago when I was there in the Abbey. I guess it would be the Herschel Observatory. Can anyone just, I mean, I don't know if anyone's a really...
built by
British Aerospace. So does anyone, I really should have looked this up. I didn't, yeah, I wasn't, so does anyone know what, I mean, but how is that connected to Halley? Oh, in 1986. Okay.
One thing that Halley is known for
Oh, microphone, yeah.
The spacecraft Giotto that looks like an acorn in the middle of there, I think that's what that is. One thing I was thinking when I saw the image, a couple of different images, including the plaque that you showed at the beginning of your talk, of Halley's Comet. Halley is not known for drawing Halley's Comet, but Giotto is. He was the artist who painted Halley's Comet, and that's why they named the spacecraft after it.
That's very cool. Yeah, because no, thank you for that. Because I would have just imagined, like, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but why wasn't the spacecraft just called Halley or something like that, right? Which I guess almost too obvious, I guess. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's I've learned something. I'm glad I came today. I've learned something. Yeah.
Any more questions for Dan? No? Nothing online either? Okay, good. So we're going to wrap it up. Thanks again, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. And let's get through the announcements. So, as alluded to earlier, I regret to announce that on September 1st, Blake Nancaro passed away after a long battle with cancer. We will be honoring him properly at a future date. The announcement of his death coming up on the long weekend. I only found out about this a couple of days ago because I was away for the long weekend. We did not have time to put things together quickly enough to give him the respect he deserves. But what I will ask is two things. First of all, I'd ask that anyone online visit our forum and click on the thread, Another Star in the Sky, to leave your thoughts and memories. And as well, there's a link to the online obituary notice there. Blake has asked that Blake's request was that his body was to be donated for medical science, and as such, there is no funeral details at the moment. Second, could I ask everyone to please stand for a moment of silence? Thank you. I just do want to take a moment to acknowledge Blake was a contributor to the Toronto Centre and to the National, to the Society as a whole for many years, and his contributions are both large and small. And in fact, if you've been here since we restarted since we've restarted our presentations after things shut down for COVID, Blake has been here. And what I mean by that is Blake Nancaro designed these slides. The template that I've been using for the last 3 years to do the announcements is a Blake Nancaro production. So he has been here for every meeting for the last 3 years and will be with us and at least in a little bit for some time to come. So moving on. Again, welcome to those of you here for the first time and those online. This is one of two types of meetings we have here online and at the Science Center. You've just seen one of our recreational astronomy nights, and in 2 weeks' time is the first of the new season of Speakers Nights. Those of you watching live on YouTube, say hello in the chat, answer some questions for the presenters. If you are a new member, please introduce yourself, and if you're coming to us from far, far away, please let us know where you're coming from. So our first speakers night of the coming season, Wednesday, September 20th, 7:30 p.m., online only. Professor John E. Moores of York University Research Chair in Space Exploration will be discussing the adventure of space science and exploration, a Canadian perspective, live here on YouTube. Our next recreational astronomy night meeting on Wednesday, the 4th of October, is going to be a busy one. Dennis Gray will be discussing the sky this month. Clay Davies will be discussing an amazing telescope you can build, an 8-inch f8 Dobsonian. Ed Trace, planetary puzzles, and an update on our Long Branch star parties. And then Mehdi Bozo-Ray, Martin, my apologies, Labartet, and Claire Gong-Minier will be discussing high school astronomy from JWST data processing to amateur spectroscopy. Also online and in person. If you'd like to present something, please contact Paul Markov. Now, our next Star Party sessions coming up. The Long Branch Park pilot project is continuing. The city observing session will be the first clear night of September 9th, 10th, 16th, or 17th from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Please check our website for go, no-go decisions based on the weather. Our traditional Bayview Village Park observing session is the first clear night of September 18th or 19th or the 21st, so not the Wednesday of that week. Because if you might have noticed, that's our speakers night. 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Again, go, no-go decision on the website. Coming up on the 22nd of September, Friday night, from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. is another session of public outreach at Millennium Square in Pickering. Join us for an evening of free public stargazing. Again, our website, check the website for go, no-go decision and for the weather. So the DDO has a lot of stuff going on coming up. On Saturday, September the 23rd, from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. and from 2:45 to 4:15 p.m. is Planetarium Day. So that's two separate sessions with our own Chris Vaughn. Registration fees are as you see here, and you have to register online. Links can be found at rascto.ca. That night, September the 23rd at 8 p.m. is Speakers Night at the DDO. Connor Hayes will be discussing Curiosity's Got Its Head in the Clouds, 11 years of cloud observations from Gale Crater on Mars. Again, fees are as listed here, and you can register online, links at rascto.ca. Then on the 24th is Sunday sun gazing at 12:30 p.m. Again, registration online with the links at rascto.ca. And then a free event, DDO Stargazing Night, the first clear night of the week of September 25th. So the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th. Bring your own binoculars. The event starts at sunset. No registration required. And then a second astronomy speakers night this month at the DDO on Friday, the 29th at 7:30 p.m. in person. Quentin Wayrick taking back the night sky, what we can do about light pollution. We have solar observing here at the Science Center on October 7th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Right outside here. And again, go or no-go decision. And we've been talking an awful lot about eclipses. So coming up on Saturday, the 14th of October, we're going to be doing an Eclipse event out front of the Science Center. Details and the call for volunteers are coming, so watch this space. The Carr Astronomical Observatory is open because it hasn't started snowing yet. Operations, we're back to normal, mostly. A few exceptions, though. We're still asking that people, we still have a maximum of 2 people who are unrelated per bedroom to share the space, and masking in common areas is encouraged, but it's by the preference of those actually in the building. Our various events have resumed. If you'd like to book a trip up there, you must be a member, and please read the details on our bookings page. Our job board, we're still looking for a volunteer committee chair. We're looking to get a marketing committee up and going. Our education and public outreach committee is always looking for online presenters, as well as telescope camera operators for virtual star parties. Reminder, thank you very much for all the people online who'd like to help, but you must be a member of the Toronto Centre first in order to volunteer. So, if you'd like to volunteer, drop me a note at president@rascto.ca. This is also the point where I plug membership in the RASC. If you'd like to volunteer, you've got to be a member first. You can renew or sign up online, which reminds me I really have to do that. At secure.rasc.ca, gift memberships for the eventual holiday season, which is still a few months away, don't worry, again, are also available. Contact the national office at mempub@rasc.ca. So one reason that I'm sort of speeding through these announcements a little faster than normal is that I would like to invite the folks here to the meeting after the meeting at the Granite Brew Pub. We will be raising a glass in Blake's memory. And also, I'd like to point out that I have phoned them and pointed out we will be a little late arriving. They will hold the kitchen open until 10:15. So if you plan to attend the Granite, I will strongly suggest that we keep the socializing that normally happens after the meeting to carry that over to the Granite. We should get going because there's some hardworking people there who will want to get home at some point. So 245 Eglinton Avenue East, the corner of Eglinton and Mount Pleasant, southeast corner, free underground parking that's accessed off of Mount Pleasant. We are usually in the front room. And to everyone else, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. Please follow us on all the forms of social media that we've got listed here. If you've been watching us live on YouTube and you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Be safe and keep looking up. Good night, everybody.